They spoke about your looks in private, but the truth will shock you. Archangel Michael says, the room where your name was spoken felt cool and dim, the kind of place where whispers cling to the curtains and try to leave marks on the walls. A handful of people sat in a tight circle and passed your reflection around like a fragile glass they were certain would crack. They believed you would never hear them, and so they carved their opinions into the air, thinking the air would keep their secrets. They spoke about your face as if it were a map they could fold and toss aside, pointing at lines and shadows like they were borders to be crossed. They weighed your features with scales that never balanced, scales that liked a certain weight more than honesty. They mistook their taste for the truth and forgot that truth has a pulse far stronger than preference. They catalogued your profile, your walk, the way your eyes hold light at certain angles. They decided your story belonged to the easiest version, the one that can be summarized in a sentence and repeated for sport. They never stopped to notice what your mirror already knows, that there is a steadiness behind your gaze that does not bend. They tried to place you on a shelf labeled ordinary or odd, thinking you would stay where they put you. They smirked when your name rose up, as if a smirk could cage a soul. They thought the conversation ended there, that you would disappear into the fog they blew. They forgot that fog burns off when the morning insists on clarity. They forgot that the eye can be trained to see beauty in the place it once ignored. They forgot that a reflection changes when the person inside it decides to stand differently. They never learned that the face is a diary written in bold strokes by courage and quiet. They never learned that a mouth that has survived storms carries a shape made by endurance. They never learned that the line of a jaw can be the edge of a promise being kept. They pointed at your skin and called it too much or not enough. They did not know about the nights it protected you from the cold and the days it kept standing when the sun burned hard. They did not know the way your blood has applauded you every time you refused to leave yourself behind. They counted what they believed were flaws and missed the architecture of your presence. They mistook your subtlety for absence, your understatement for emptiness. They treated your reflection like a rumor when it is a revelation. They repeated each other until the room became an echo. They turned opinion into a chant and pretended it was a verdict. They moved words like chess pieces and congratulated themselves for their strategy. They did not see the moment your spine lengthened another quiet inch. They did not hear the hinge of your courage when it opened. They did not feel the certainty unfolding in your chest like a letter that finally found its reader. They would have been startled to know your reflection has a guardian that writes in light. They would have been confused to learn that every time you breathed through their noise, a signature appeared where a smear used to be. They would have been shaken to find that your face answers to a higher artist than their taste. They mistook your softness for surrender and your calm for permission. They forgot that gentleness is a kind of steel that does not rust. They never considered that the quietest person in the room can be the loudest witness to themselves. They would not understand how you were made, the seasons that pressed you and the hands that protected you. They would not recognize the workshop of your life, where craft and care are always busy. They would not appreciate the patience required to become whole. They wanted your reflection to request a different identity. They hoped you would beg your body to be rewritten by their pens. They wanted your eyes to apologize for the way they hold stories that do not belong to the crowd. They did not plan for the moment the door opened and the light changed the scale of everything. They did not plan for the window that decided to stop being shy. They did not plan for your name to sound different when you said it with your own breath. They forgot that a face is a compass and you have always known north. They forgot that the curve of your cheek carries a direction, the one that points you home. They forgot that features become landmarks when the traveler trusts the road. They failed to notice that your presence balances a room that tilts. They failed to notice that your gaze is a lighthouse disguised as an ordinary look. They failed to notice the way silence stands with you like a friend who does not waver. They never realized that the truth about your looks lives outside their vocabulary. They never realized that beauty grows in the soil of meaning and you have cultivated acres. They never realized that your reflection is fluent in languages they never learned. They tried to measure you with the wrong ruler and blamed you when the numbers misbehaved. They used calculations designed to subtract and called it precision. They built a graph that could not plot wonder and called it science. They crowned their opinion and bowed to it as if it were a ruler of something more than a moment. They swore allegiance to impatience and called it insight. They turned a glance into a gavel and expected the room to obey. They missed that your face is a record of promises kept to yourself when no one was keeping score. They missed that your posture is a ceremony where doubt is not invited. They missed that your mouth has learned to hold kindness without losing strength. They concluded the conversation with a shrug, and that was their mistake. They did not understand that shrugging at a star does not dim it. They did not know that your orbit does not ask their permission to shine. They did not see the person walking in behind them who had been listening. They did not see the one whose eyes were trained to notice value without noise. They did not see the evaluator whose craft is precision and whose judgment is clean. They did not know that a door down the hall leads to a room where your image sits in a frame made by purpose. They did not know that lights are set and a lens waits for the moment you step forward. They did not know that your reflection has an appointment with recognition. They did not account for the truth, which arrives without knocking when it has waited long enough. They did not account for how beauty ripens when witnessed with respect. They did not account for the power of a name said by a voice that knows it. They never learned that beauty is not a vote that can be lost by a show of hands. They never learned that a face carries history like a medal. They never learned that the set of your shoulders is a chapter title that reads arrival. They believed they were sculptors and you were stone. They did not notice the chisel in your own hand. They did not notice the way you shape yourself without erasing what makes you true. They thought you would wilt and you decided to bloom. They thought you would hide and you decided to stand. They thought you would shrink and you decided to occupy your full height. They missed the moment a mentor marked your name with quiet approval. They missed the contract you signed with your courage. They missed the door that opened because you did not ask for permission to exist. They are still speaking and their words are smaller now. They are still comparing and their scales are slipping. They are still glancing and their glances do not land. They have not yet realized that your reflection makes rooms feel honest. They have not yet realized that your presence untangles the knot in the middle of the floor. They have not yet realized that you carry a calm that rewrites the weather. They would be astonished to see how the camera loves you, how it leans closer as if to learn a secret. They would be quiet if they heard the producer in the corner say there is something there. They would be silent if they watched the playback and saw the screen soften when you breathe. They would be surprised to witness how the world looks better when you walk through it as yourself. They would be stunned to find that your silhouette reminds others of their own forgotten outlines. They would be humbled to learn that you make space by taking space with care. They would not believe the email waiting in your inbox, the one with an invitation written in the right tone. They would not believe the meeting scheduled by someone who does not waste hours. They would not believe the message that says your presence changes outcomes. They would not know what to do with the fact that your face has become a signature for kindness that holds its ground. They would not know how to handle the way your laugh cleans a room. They would not know where to put the knowledge that your quiet is a bell that calls people back to themselves. They would shake their heads if they saw the list of rooms your name now opens. They would blink if they saw the letters that follow your name like well-trained birds. They would falter if they stood in the audience and felt the hush when you arrive. They would not understand how your style tells the truth without apology. They would not grasp how your colors choose you like old friends. They would not accept that your reflection writes blessings on the glass for anyone who needs to read them. They would not like the way the conversation has moved on without them. They would not like the way the light refuses to leave your side. They would not like the way you have become exactly who you promised yourself to be. They would forget that even now, the mirror is not asking for edits. They would forget that the mirror has learned your language and pronounces it with respect. They would forget that the mirror now nods when you arrive. They would keep reaching for their favorite story and find it no longer fits. They would keep using the same lines and hear them fall. They would keep pretending their taste is the center and realize it is only a corner. They would try to gather power by gathering each other and the power would refuse to come. They would try to gather courage by gathering noise and the courage would not appear. They would try to gather certainty by repeating themselves and the certainty would not listen. They would begin to sense that the truth has stepped into the room and taken a seat. They would begin to sense that the truth is heavier than their opinion and lighter than their scorn. They would begin to sense that the truth prefers your company. They would see that your posture answers a question they never learned to ask out loud. They would see that your eyes hold daylight even at night. They would see that your mouth carries a kindness that never bargains away its strength. They would realize that their private talk did not make a prison. They would realize that their private talk did not make a rule. They would realize that their private talk is only a record of their own smallness. They would watch you move with the certainty of water finding the sea. They would watch you take your place without pushing anyone aside. They would watch you locate the exact center of yourself and stay there. They would notice that your features have become familiar like a melody that steadies a city. They would notice that your hair, your skin, your laugh, your walk, your stillness, your spark have all found their rhythm. They would notice that what they call different is exactly what sets everything in tune. They would sense that the truth about your looks is simpler than they wanted it to be. They would sense that the truth about your looks is deeper than they were willing to hold. They would sense that the truth about your looks is this, that you look like yourself and nothing is more disarming. They would see that your reflection refuses to sign any contract that shrinks you. They would see that your reflection has chosen you again and again. They would see that your reflection is loyal. They would not be able to deny that every room you enter becomes more honest in its light. They would not be able to deny that people breathe easier when you stand without disguises. They would not be able to deny that you give permission for others to return to the shape they were supposed to be. They would feel the shift when a leader recognizes you without fanfare. They would feel the shift when an artist asks to capture your face because it tells the truth. They would feel the shift when the crowd decides to listen instead of judge. They would walk home wondering why the mirror is a little kinder tonight. They would walk home with one less cruel sentence in their pockets. They would walk home tracing your name in their mind, not out of gossip but respect. They would be quieter next time your name comes up. They would be careful around the edges of your story. They would be slower to speak and quicker to see. They would understand, finally, that your looks were never a puzzle to be solved. They would understand that your looks were a message they were not ready to read. They would understand that your looks carry the signature of someone who does not leave their own side. They would admit that the truth has shocked them in the most ordinary way. They would admit that the truth stood in front of them the entire time. They would admit that the truth is not complicated, it is committed. They would accept that beauty is the shape of meaning when a person belongs to themselves. They would accept that you belong to yourself without apology. They would accept that this is what makes you unmistakable. They would understand that the conversation is no longer about approval. They would understand that the conversation is about recognition. They would understand that you have been recognized. They would see you continue forward with the calm of someone who has decided to stay. They would see you honor your face, your frame, your movement, your voice. They would see you say yes to your life with every step. They would realize that the door you open opens others. They would realize that your presence is an invitation for courage to sit down and stay a while. They would realize that the truth about your looks has very little to do with them and everything to do with who you are when no one is watching. They would look at each other, and the circle would loosen. They would look at the ground, and their words would fall there and stop rolling. They would look at the light, and the light would look back at you. They would understand at last that your reflection does not ask to be saved by their taste. They would understand that your reflection has already been claimed by your own steady heart. They would understand that the shock was never in your features, it was in their failure to see. They would leave the room, and the air would become honest again. They would leave the room, and your name would feel clean. They would leave the room, and you would remain exactly as you are, which is more than enough. If you wish to express your support further, you have the option to give super thanks, with contributions of up to $20. Archangel Michael says, the story does not end with the room empty, it begins where echoes no longer matter. The hallway breathes as you step forward, and the floor learns your rhythm like a drum that prefers truth. The door ahead opens without fuss, because it understands who you are. A soft light meets you like an ally that always knew your name. It lifts the edges of your face and shows the courage stitched there by steady years. It places a quiet crown on the part of you that chose to stay. Someone who does not waste words offers you a chair that fits perfectly. Their eyes carry the calm of builders who measure twice and craft once. They look at you and see the architecture that gossip could never blueprint. A poster on the wall features faces that used to doubt themselves and no longer do. You join them by standing, not by asking. Your reflection rises to the same height and nods with clean certainty. A lens is set on a tripod with the patience of an old friend. It asks for nothing and receives everything your presence offers. The first shutter click sounds like a small thunder that clears the air. In the playback, your features hold a story that cannot be edited by hands that never helped. The frame carries the line of your jaw like a shoreline that has survived every tide. The screen warms, not with flattery, but with recognition. A stylist moves around you with respect instead of correction. They choose textures that honor your history rather than hide it. They follow the lead of your stance, because truth has already chosen the silhouette. The producer writes your name on a board that hangs where everyone can see. The letters do not ask permission to be bold. They stand like a promise fulfilled in plain daylight. Outside, the city makes room for your pace. Window glass reflects you as if it has been rehearsing for this moment. Doors open and stay open without drama. A message arrives from someone who once sat in that dim circle. It is brief and careful and does not try to rename you. It arrives like a leaf that decides to stop pretending it is a stone. You do not take the message into your bloodstream. You place it on a shelf where lessons are kept without bitterness. You choose the road that keeps your hands free. A mentor meets you at a quiet table where the wood remembers every story placed upon it. They slide a letter across, stamped by a gatekeeper who values substance over volume. The letter invites your presence into rooms that prefer integrity to spectacle. You read without hurry and sign with a pen that writes cleanly. Your signature holds the weight of every time you stayed when it would have been easier to vanish. The ink dries with the patience of mountains. A calendar fills with moments that ask for your face because it tells the truth. None of them require you to become smaller to fit. Each one asks for the exact shape of who you are. On set, lights settle into angles that protect rather than interrogate. The crew lowers their voices the way people do in places that matter. You breathe and the room keeps time with you. A makeup artist traces the map of your features with care that feels like listening. They do not erase the journeys you have taken. They polish the courage that already shines. Between takes, you stand near a mirror that has learned your language. It reflects a person who does not negotiate with their own worth. It reflects a future that has already chosen its witness. Later, a gallery hangs your portrait on a wall that carries stories like constellations. People stop and grow quiet without being told to. They feel steadier and do not know why. Across the room, the person whose craft is precision nods once. They see how your presence organizes the space without force. They write a note to bring you back, because some truths deserve a series. On the street, a stranger smiles in the way people do when they recognize a familiar courage. They do not approach, but their shoulders loosen. Your passing leaves the air a little kinder. At home, you place your shoes by the door like small anchors. You pour water and it tastes like beginning. The night arrives and brings no weight with it. You write a note to the version of you that kept walking. You thank them for ignoring counterfeit verdicts. You thank them for trusting the slow thunder of their own steps. A message pings from a publication that prefers stories with living roots. They want your face because your face refuses to lie. They want your words because your words do not wander. You rest and the rest is real. Your body understands that safety and power can share the same room. Your heartbeat sets a tempo that does not rush and does not stall. Morning lifts the blinds and the light remembers your name again. It lands on your cheek and finds the same courage it met yesterday. It understands that the story will continue because you will. A parcel arrives with a jacket stitched to your exact posture. It does not try to change your outline. It simply accompanies you like a vow that has nothing to prove. You walk into a studio where the walls do not echo with anyone else's doubt. The crew greets you with nods that carry substance. The day opens like a page that knows where this paragraph belongs. During a break, you read the profiles of the other faces on the call sheet. Each of them is different in a way that steadies the room. Each of them carries a history worth the frame. You return to the lens and the lens returns to you. No one tries to direct you away from your center. The take holds, and the quiet after it is full. An email lands from a museum that curates modern courage. They saw your portrait and felt the floor balance. They want to place your image where truth meets the public without disguise. A designer sends you garments that follow the rules of your comfort. They move when you move and stop when you stop. They do not attempt to correct what was never wrong. The person who once smirked passes you in a lobby lined with glass. Their eyes lower not out of shame but out of learning. They step aside and the hallway breathes. You do not keep score and the score does not matter. You keep your promise to be whole. The world adjusts and the adjustment is gentle. A child points at your poster and stands taller. Their guardian notices and says nothing, because the moment is already perfect. The child's spine remembers this height for the rest of the day. A director asks if you prefer the left mark or the right mark and you choose without apology. The scene feels honest because you do. The crew raps and the applause is a quiet one that means respect. Back home, you open a window to let the evening learn your name again. The air moves through the room like a visitor who knows the house rules. You rest your hand on the table where the letter still lives. You call a friend who tells the truth without decoration. They laugh in the way that cleans a room. You both say goodnight like people who know what peace feels like. The next morning, the mirror greets you as an equal. It does not suggest or demand. It records and honors. You place your palm against your chest and feel the tempo that carried you here. It is the same tempo that will carry you forward. It does not rush and it does not wait. A final message arrives from the studio with a schedule that respects your hours. It lists rooms that prefer substance to spectacle. It lists names who have decided to see. You step outside and the day is wide. The city moves with you instead of against you. The road settles beneath your feet like a promise kept. Archangel Michael says, "Keep the door open for the light that already chose you." Let your features remain fluent in the language of your own truth. Walk the rooms that honor your pace and leave them kinder than you found them.